You're listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast, a podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. And welcome back to the Renegade Blitz podcast. I'm Ty Polk, joined as always by Chris Ward. Glad to have you back on here as we talk free agency with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And joining us on the Renegade Blitz podcast is Dave Dameshek, the host of the Extra Points podcast with Cousin Sal and the -3 podcast. Dave, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, sure things, fellas. Thanks for having me. Anything going on with the Steelers right now or no? Everything's nice and agreeable. Everybody, all the fan base, everybody's excited for a sure to be successful 2021. Am I right about that? Give me the Cliff's notes if I'm wrong on that.
No.
The Juju debate was a big one before he got signed, and it still kind of is now. People are still a little bit heated by it, but I don't know. It should be interesting to see what they do in 2021, but it definitely seems like the sky is falling if you read a lot of the Pittsburgh media, and especially on the radio.
Yeah, it's a little bit much. It's a little ridiculous.
Yeah, man. Right now we're trying to get on our wide receiver kicking someone in the head up in Canada.
Yeah,
the days of our Steelers still continue. Let's talk about this free agency period for the Steelers. As expected, it was painful. Bud Dupree gets his big money contract with the Titans. Mike Hilton stays in the division with the Bengals. And surprise departures from Matt Filer and Tyson Alulu.
None of it is, I guess there were a couple of small surprises there. You know, Alu not being back is a bummer. But I mean, you know, we saw Bud Dupree on his way out the door. That can't be a surprise to anybody. And, you know, I think pretty much everything else kind of went to plan. I guess the Steven Nelson departure is the biggest stunner, but you kind of knew that they weren't going to be able to keep all their corners. So.
Well, what departure, in your opinion, hurts the Steelers the most?
I guess in the here and now, I guess I would say Nelson, although there's something weird going on with that story, why the Steelers seemed at some point to become anxious. And maybe it's as simple as clearing cap space, because the thing that people have forgotten about with free agency, or some people tend to gloss over, is that they haven't had the draft yet. And I think that comes in somewhere around $7-8 million that you have to pay your rookies. And so they have to have that money at minimum to be able to do it. So, you know, as constituted, unless believe me, I like if you've seen Lane in person, he cuts quite a figure. I mean, he's tall and he's a tall drink of water. He kind of cuts the figure of a poor man's Mel Blount. And that has nothing to do with how he's going to play. But, you know, year 3 now, he was considered a project. This is when he should arrive if he's going to. And I don't know if this is some indication that they have some optimism that he's ready to do that, or for that matter, Pierre, the free agent, the undrafted free agent. If between those two, they can find a replacement. But, you know, of course, we're as I keep saying, this feels a little bit like looking at a painting, whether it's Picasso or otherwise, and looking at it at a third of the way finished and saying, I don't know what this is. This stinks. Like, well, I mean, we haven't had the draft yet. And by the way, the Steelers still may be able to go bargain basement hunting in free agency for some guys out there. I mean, Jesse James is the name you keep hearing floated, but there's some good name brands out there, guys like Casey Hayward that got released from the Chargers that might fit the bill, work in the slot for the Steelers in 21. So, you know, it's an incomplete painting, so let's not overreact to what we're seeing so far.
Of the players that left, who do you think will be the most successful with their new team? I know Bud's down there in Nashville, and you know, Mike Hilton in Cincinnati. That should be interesting with the Steelers playing them twice a year.
Yeah, Warren Sharp posted something pretty interesting on social media that had never occurred to me, that over the last 6 or 8 years, big name free agent corners moving from one team to the other. I don't know if Mike Hilton counts as a big name, but got a fair amount of loot there to go work the slot. In Cincy, those guys don't tend to thrive in their new locations for the long term. And that feels like a finishing piece for a team that's relatively far away. So I guess the answer is, I mean, Filer gets dropped into a good spot. I think the Chargers are going to win that division this year. I keep saying that since the season ended. And I think that they're going to end up being better than the Chiefs this year. So he's in a juicy spot from a team perspective. I guess the guy who has the most upside is, for his new team is Bud Dupree. I mean, obviously the last couple of years has looked terrific. So he can build on that. It's a different equation, as we know, though, because he had the best pass rushing OLB on the other side of him in Pittsburgh the last few years. And now all of a sudden he's the guy again, as the Titans are constituted, depending on what they do in the draft, they're going to look to him to be the man, and whether or not he rises to that has yet to be seen. But I'll go with Bud.
And the Steelers now have over $14 million in cap space as of today, March the 24th, with the announcement of Ebron's restructure and the pending terms for Cassius Marsh's contract still to be decided. What other moves could the Steelers make to free up more cap room, or do you think they're staying put?
I say it all the time, and for real, there are people who understand high math better than I do. And the reason that I decided to talk into a microphone for a living is so that I could avoid math. I always resented it in school. I don't know why the man made it a tent pole. I get it through, the times tables up to 12 and maybe long division. But, what was the nonsense with putting us through algebra and all that? That was dumb. But anyway, I don't know about high math. Let's leave that to Khan and the guys who know how to work it. But from what I gather, to it could still be reworked to free up something. But I think they're getting pretty close to finished with what finishing moves they can make to get ready for the draft. And maybe, like I say, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world that Jesse James is out there. Unless the Steelers are raw about Jesse James predicting that he was going to succeed at a higher level in Detroit than he did in Pittsburgh. And like you just did, calling the Steelers a soap opera, like that's what he said on his way out the door around the whole Antonio Brown mess. But unless that's an issue, it makes a lot of sense that you could get him on the cheap for a team that's desperate to get a tight end and a more conventional one too, a blocking ones. But, that's a position there that between Ebron, James, and then if you assume Gentry, who also is a project, year 3 got hurt last year. But, at least from a blocking perspective, that if they could get Jesse James and Gentry in there and pair those two up with Eric Ebron, a position that maybe isn't as dire as it looks right now. But that would be, I guess, I think they're pretty close to done with what they can do to, bring in more free agent names here.
And then moving on to Juju Smith-Schuster, who's perhaps the most polarizing player among the fan base. He returns on a below market 1-year deal, making $8 million this year. He has a $2.4 million cap hit because they did like 4 void years, which I didn't really know before this free agency. But he turned down the Chiefs, Ravens, and so there were some reports about the Eagles too. But I heard from like Mike Florio that they were never really in it. They offered more money for Juju Smith-Schuster. But do you like that he's coming back? And what do you see him from this year with Ben coming back as well?
I'm fine with him back. It's not, I didn't think that it was essential for 2021 success that they brought Juju back. I'd kind of accepted the fact that he was gone as soon as Colbert drafted Chase Claypool instead of J.K. Dobbins or otherwise, whatever that was, 10, 11 months ago now. I had assumed that was where they were. And I think the Steelers themselves knew that they weren't going to sign Juju. And I think Juju and his side of things didn't anticipate being back in Pittsburgh, but things broke a certain way. Aguilar went for way too much money to New England. And, Juju is a distinctive talent, and he is a talent. I don't think he's a pedestrian as the glass half full types would have you believe. I just think he's a specific type of pass catcher for him. And he's not a guy who, if what ailed you last year, if you're a team and you're looking out there, if you're the Patriots, for instance, people who say, Belichick went after Aguilar. Why didn't he go after Juju? Well, they're two completely different kinds of guys. And like I say, I also think Belichick made a little bit of a mistake. I think the Ravens probably regret not going a little bit harder after him, probably after all is said and done. because he's ideal for what they like to do, specific, or what Lamar Jackson is best at this point when he's throwing the ball, and that's working the seams. You would think that dropping him in there would be just about ideal. If Des Bryant was making plays for him at the back end, imagine what JuJu Smith-Schuster could do in his prime. I think the big question with the Steelers offense is, and I keep pointing back to this, people kind of rewrote things as they started to scuffle there in November and December coming down the stretch there. People kind of reconfigured what the expectation was for that team a year ago, or, this past season, which is that everybody knew the defense was going to lead the way. It was supposed to dominate, and Roethlisberger returning with a capable offense needed to scratch out some points and complement the dominant defense. And then at some point, after Dupree and Devin Bush go out, all of a sudden it became something different, and it became, what's wrong with Roethlisberger? Why isn't he putting up the huge point totals that he used to? I mean, listen, it's not an indictment of a 38-year-old guy, now 39, who, has taken a beating. He's different than Tom Brady or Drew Brees or Peyton Manning. Those guys never took licks their entire career. Roethlisberger's entire playing style lent itself to being the common figure. It's something I say all the time about that is it's sort of one of sports' biggest paradoxes is that the biggest dudes are the ones who wear out the most quickly because they're the common factor in those collisions. You think about Gronkowski or Mark Bavaro in football. I mean, those guys got the crap kicked out of them, and they were Cam Newton at 31 isn't the player he was a couple of years ago because he used to run all the time. And it took three guys, big professional football players, running full speed on purpose and throwing their full weight into him. Of course, that's going to beat up a guy. And Roethlisberger is also degraded. And by the way, Shaq suffered from the same thing. Eric Lindros in hockey. The big dudes are the guys who take the biggest beating and wear out. So Roethlisberger at 38, maybe in this era, it's like, other guys play into their early 40s now. Maybe Roethlisberger still will, by the way, for all we know. But I think that the glass half full I'll give about Roethlisberger and the offense in general is we knew the offensive line was lousy coming down the stretch. And then you marry that with a guy who just can't get off his spot anymore in Roethlisberger. Well, that was bad. They had no ability to run the ball. Never mind even trying to run. They couldn't pass block. They couldn't do anything. Here's the puncher's chance, though. If they can improve the offensive line just a little bit through the draft. And two, we always hear about our whole lives, the ACL, like, hey, a guy returning from ACL surgery is always better in year 2 post-surgery than he is year 1. How do we know that that's not going to be the case with Roethlisberger? I don't think he was dead armed. I think a lot of people said, boy, he just doesn't have it anymore. The one part of him throwing the ball that wasn't what we are used to seeing is the deep ball. He was really accurate, and there were few human beings that could keep up with him on that count over the course of his career. But he was not good with that last year. But what if he starts throwing lasers again? Who's to say? I mean, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, and maybe one of you two guys, and if you are, then you should interrupt me here. But otherwise, there's a chance he's going to be a better version than what we saw last year. And last year, it's a little overstated how lousy he was, although we're kidding ourselves if we think he is going to be one of those guys who, like he was in his prime, who could drag a mediocre roster to great success. He's not that guy anymore. But if Peyton Manning can win the Super Bowl in 2015 by leaning on a high-end defense, why not Roethlisberger in 2021?
Well, let's talk about some of those defensive players, and one of those guys are Cam Sutton returning on a 2-year deal. Now with Nelson leaving, it seems that Sutton will go into the cornerback number 2 position. My question for you is this. Do you believe that he can eventually become cornerback number 1 when they decide to move on from Joe Hayden?
Oh, that's pretty good. I think his main feature that's appealing right now is because, again, back to the unfinished painting metaphor, I don't know what's going to be available to them in the draft, and I don't know what they like between Lane and Pierre and otherwise in that secondary. But what Cam Sutton gives them in right now is the versatility to go into the slot or pick up or pair up with Joe Hayden. And I guess depending on the draft and whatever else they might do, we'll see. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely, I mean, gotta like the fact that he, like I say, can move around. A lot of guys get a lot of credit for being the so-called shutdown corner and everything, when in fact they just lock into one side of the field. And the Steelers defense, even though it's gone through a number of changes over the last 15 years, they do still like a guy who can bounce around like that. And I guess glass half full, I'll say yes. Clearly Colbert and Tomlin, and that's definitely Tomlin's area of strength, or his area of expertise is in the secondary specifically. And you can see that based on the moves that they did and didn't make with Nelson and Hayden and Hilton and Cam Sutton, that they obviously value Sutton and intend to hold on to him beyond just this year. They want to, it feels like they're going to try to extend him longer term after this year, which is an indication that guys who know better than any of the three of us do, namely Tomlin and Colbert, seem to really like the ceiling of Sutton, which he has yet to reach. But in the meantime, he's been terrific working a couple different roles. And I also think that in the 21st century, it's not enough to be a strong defense. And you don't just silence whoever you're playing. You must create a couple or a few turnovers over the course of 60 minutes. That's what swings NFL games now, even as everything favors quarterbacks and offense. So if you can take away a possession or two over the course of a game, that's what swings games these days. And Cam Sutton is kind of built to do that, I think.
Another two players that will be replacing production on defense are Robert Spillane and Chris Wormley. We all saw what Spillane did for the Steelers last year, especially that hit on Derrick Henry on the goal line. But Wormley was acquired in a rare trade last year with Baltimore, but he didn't really show much. It was a non-factor last season. Do you think does the Spillane experiment played a role in Williams' departure? And who do you think will replace Alu? Because Wormley, his body frame doesn't seem as like a nose tackle. He seems like more of like a depth signing for the defensive line.
Yeah, those low round picks that they made over the last couple of years, I guess they're looking at those guys to at least be rotational guys. And that is something that I think is a little undercovered. One thing, that is definitely true over the last 20 years or maybe more is that the Steelers-Ravens rivalry is so good because they're kind of mirror images of each other and what they want and the kind of players that they go after, and their overall brand of ball can be similar. Obviously, now they've deviated wildly with the Lamar Jackson offense versus the Roethlisberger offense, but they still both, you can tell, believe in the line of scrimmage, both sides of the line of scrimmage. And the Ravens have done a better job of having a rotation. The Steelers' defensive front, if it's had a weakness, it's a lack of depth. Stephon Tuitt goes out 2 years ago, and they really fell off. I guess the defense generally was pretty good after Tuitt went off, but he was still an absence and hard to replace. So Wormley, rotational guy, I guess, Bugs and otherwise are that as well. They're not guys I wouldn't want to, as a Steelers fan, seeing getting 40 snaps a game. And I don't think that there's a chance of that happening. I expect that they're going to try to do something in the draft as they usually do, but they do have more pressing needs. When you look at Hayward and Tuitt to begin with, that doesn't jump out as a position of need. And maybe they can hold the fort with those names that were floating and maybe dropping another guy or two in there via the draft.
And what do you think about Williams getting released, saving $4 million in cap space? I was always, I think a lot of Steelers fans were always a big fan of Vince Williams. Like, following him on Twitter and stuff. He's just
definitely.
He's great follow and everything. That was tough to see. Yeah,
it's a bummer because he is so Tyler Dunn, who I think keeps a focus on the Buffalo Bills mostly, wrote a great piece about Vince Williams just before the playoffs got going about how he is sort of the classic Steeler. And he is. The problem is that, like we say, the game's evolved, and Spillane maybe would have thrived more when the NFL was built more around the run than it is against the pass. Spillane, I don't think anybody on the Steelers anticipated this guy being, Spillane coming in there and being an every down linebacker. They got jammed up though, from a lack of depth, and they didn't have anywhere else to go. He's fine again. He's a guy again that I would put it as he's fine in the here and now, but they certainly need to add somebody before the season gets going. It'd be disappointing if Spillane is out there, is on the field for a majority of defensive snaps this year, because he's limited, but there is something to still in 2021 and beyond. There is still something to a rugged linebacker in the middle there, and tuning up the opposing running back and maybe breaking their will a little bit, and desire to keep on trying to break tackles in the second half. But Spillane is, he's a fun story. He reminds me too, when he got the green dot on his helmet. Remember that? Were you guys around when they used to put the green sticker to make sure your kids didn't drink poison under
Mr. Yuck?
Mr. Yuck. I tried to call him Mr. Yuck. Because he started wearing the green dot, and all he is he just plays ugly. He just beats you up real bad. You playing against Spillane, he'll make you sick, Mr. Yuck. It didn't stick, but maybe you guys can help out and make that nickname sing this year.
We'll be sure to get that out for you. Okay. But
thank you.
There's an interesting thing about the Williams situation. I don't know if you heard out in Las Vegas with Mariota. He was originally not fond for taking a pay cut, and it seemed like the Raiders kind of like released him, but not really. Is there a possibility that you think that Williams may come back, or they may take a look at Avery Williamson as another middle linebacker replacement? Williamson, he's kind of a weird thing. He's not a coverage linebacker, but he racks up a ton of tackles. He's well over 100. Could he be a guy that the Steelers look for middle linebacker depth?
That makes a lot of sense to me. It's funny in the reverse that, I thought Williamson played well. He showed up. You noticed him coming down the stretch there as he started getting more reps out there. He started to jump out, at least to me. You could see him making plays. There were Morgan Burnett and otherwise, like plenty of those Bostic and guys like that who just were who were invisible men out on the field. I'd be fine with Williamson again. I mean, the pickings are slim when you're up against it the way the Steelers are at this point, but they're definitely, just go through it. If you think the sky is falling and they don't have the money to sign 3 or 5 of these guys, but look it through right now and see what's available. There are name guys out there that if you heard that they signed with the Steelers, you would probably be excited. I like, as I say, Casey Hayward would be a guy at this stage in his career. He's not as borderline dominant as he was 3 years ago. But if I heard that the Steelers got him, I'd be happy about that. And Avery Williamson is kind of that too. He's got bum knees and everything, but for what it's worth, anecdotally, I thought he looked pretty good in spots last year.
Well, now I want to get your take on the offensive line. It was kind of a focus depth-wise for the Steelers in free agency. Banner is back. J.C. Hassenauer's back. They are returning B.J. Finney after a year with stints between the Bengals and the Seahawks. And they signed Joe Haeg. If you remember, he was the guy that couldn't hang on to the ball in the Super Bowl when Tom Brady threw to that offensive lineman.
Exactly what Roethlisberger needs. After what happened all last year, now we get another guy who can't catch. Perfect.
Well, I think Zach Banner is going to have a little bit of an issue with that guy as well. But overall, first, I want to say this right now. The Steelers can't possibly roll into the season with Finney and Hassenauer at center, can they?
Let me put this asterisk down. I say it all the time. I'll say it to you guys now. I have no ability to evaluate offensive linemen, and no one else does either, except guys who played offensive linemen or played offensive line or are willing to sit there and watch all 22 video and really just focus in on the offensive line. Otherwise, it's pretentious asses who think they know what they're talking about. Like, I don't like when you hear somebody talk about Tony Baselli's the best left tackle I've ever seen. Like, based on what? What do you know? He's a 300-pound man who leaned up on other sizable guys. What do you know about whether or not he was good or bad at it? You really have to focus in on who's good at doing it. Now, from the people who are smart about this subject, they tell me that Hassenauer was not very good last year. And yeah, they're not, they don't have high pedigree guys at center, and they have question marks elsewhere on the offensive line right now. But it does seem pretty clear that the Steelers are going to try to tune that area up considerably between now and the season. And it does seem like, based on the guys who evaluate such things, that they're going to have a chance to do it at left tackle. And there's some decent names at center as well. I know a lot of people are buzzing about the kid out of Alabama. I don't know that. I mean, talk about uninspiring for everybody who is wringing their hands about like, oh, Juju and the sky is falling and they need to get a quarterback. Those same people will not be terribly excited if their first round pick is a center, or for that matter, a left tackle. People will say, all right, taking our medicine. It's something we had to do, but it's not as though the banks of the Three Rivers will erupt with joy if it's a lineman going in the first round. But yes, to answer your question, no, I my hope is that they will. And here's the thing. As I say, we know Dotson had a nice rookie season. So that's a nice building block. Zach Banner, we know they like him a lot. So hopefully he pans out. And then the other guy who's a big X factor is David DeCastro. By all accounts, he played very poorly last year. And if you look at I happen to be somebody who ascribes to the notion that professional athletes are in fact human beings and do experience human emotions. They do have outsized self-esteem, because obviously they were the best player on any team that they ever played on until they got to the NFL. So of course they believe in themselves, but still they believe in themselves. And it sounded to me like David DeCastro, if you were following him in post games and during the week, there was a lot of existential, like, what are we playing for? COVID's going on. And I don't know if we should be doing this. And there was a lot of, spiritual kind of angst coming out of the guy. I don't know, but if he bounces back to anything close to the level that he's been for the majority of his career, then all of a sudden the offensive line could for real be a position of strength there. And then it flips the whole thing and all the assumptions everybody has about how bad the Steelers offense is going to be this year.
And also, Dave, what are your thoughts on Miles Killebrew? He seems like he was signed to be a special teams ace, but do you think there could be a bigger role for him?
I don't know about that, but I'm surprised when I saw that, because wasn't that the thought behind Derek Watt? Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, he should be a fullback, but he's going to be a special teams ace. All right, how many special teams aces do we need? And believe me, I like having difference makers over there, but I don't get the sense that they're looking for him to do anything more than.
Well, not to cut you off, Dave. This guy, Killebrew, what I looked up on him, when Terrell Austin, who's currently a part of the Steelers defensive staff, was the defensive coordinator with the Lions, Killebrew's first 2 years, he had 588 snaps on defense. The last 3 years with Patricia, only 88. It kind of feels like this is like a guy that they kind of know more than everyone else. That's why we really want to ask this question, because it's kind of a weird situation.
I hear you, man. And it is a great example of what they always talk about, that, it does matter what situation a player goes to. It's not just determined on raw ability. It's the situation has a lot to do with it. It's the difference between Steve Kerr and Steve Alford in the NBA. One guy flamed out. The other guy is an icon still from a championship basketball town. But maybe that's you will see him being used. And I don't think failing in Detroit necessarily means that you're doomed to failure as a professional football player. So see, this is right. I like this glass half full kind of thinking. Another option potentially. And, that for all the talk about, and I think it was fair talk too, about at some point the coaching staff, it should raise a red flag when it's coaching hiring season and none of the Steelers assistants get any interviews. Like, that should spook Tomlin and the rest of the organization. Like, wait, so nobody wants Randy Fichtner? No one wants to ask if we're allowed to interview him? Wonder why that is. But Austin it was before Patricia landed in Detroit. It wasn't that long ago when they had their little playoff run, whatever that was now, a little bit in the rearview mirror. But Austin was a guy who people were talking to about being a defensive coordinator. And, so maybe he will be able to round him into shape or return him into being a guy who gets more regular snaps than just on special teams.
And speaking of coaches, did you like the Matt Canada hire as the new offense coordinator?
I like it because I get completely the cynicism that he's bounced around. And, you talk to people about his personality, and I guess he's a type A fella, and whether or not that marries up with Roethlisberger is the big question. But, I watched Pitt football. What was that? 3, 4, 5 years ago, whatever that was. And that jet sweep stuff was really fun to watch out in Heinz Field. And I got excited in the early part of the season that maybe we would see that get employed. And you saw Chase Claypool take advantage of that. And Ray could be turned into a weapon around that. And Deontay Johnson is nothing if not shifty and hard to keep up with. So they have pieces to use that Canada offense. And now the big question is Roethlisberger has run the show for so long, and it's pretty clear likes to face the defense the whole time, that he wants to be in the gun. He wants if there's a running back with him, he wants him on his hip, not several feet behind him. And, you see Brady and Rodgers and, just about everybody else using play action. I get Roethlisberger doesn't like the difference between Brady and Breeze and Roethlisberger is that the two former guys step to the line of scrimmage, and their great power is assessing what the defense is doing pre-snap. And so they're great at that. That's not Roethlisberger's thing as much. He likes to he wants to look at the defense. So if he has to turn around to make that fake to the running back, and then he has to pick his head back up, maybe he's uncomfortable with that. If he's not willing to do that, that's going to be a problem, because Canada is going to want to, I don't know if he wants to use a fullback, but I think he is going to want to put his quarterback in the gun at least under center some of the time. And 7 at this late stage in his career. I mean, did you see him trying the RPO stuff, Roethlisberger, the last few years? Or it isn't terribly effective when the defense knows that the quarterback is almost never going to give it to the running back. He's never going to leave it in the running back's belly when he sticks it in there. 1. And 2, it seemed like Roethlisberger just flat out never could get a grip on the ball. His passes always come out weird on the RPO stuff and everything. So, I mean, he might just be loath and he'd be like, I can't teach an old dog new tricks. Let's just go with my old way. And I don't think he's going to be able to steamroll Canada the way he did Fiechner. But then again, I guess that's why Art 2 probably had that powwow with him a month ago, was to say, like, listen, new approach here, Roethlisberger, we're bringing you back, but you're cool with Canada, right? You're cool with, if things get sideways, we might give Dwayne Haskins or Mason Rudolph a look, or I bet those are the kind of things Art 2 was vetting with him beyond what number can we sign you at for 2021.
And there are 3 notable names still available in the free agency pool that still can be signed by the Steelers: James Conner, Jordan Berry, and Alejandro Villanueva. Out of those 3, can you see any of them coming back to Pittsburgh?
Keep hearing the buzz about Villanueva, and I guess if there's just no market for him, I mean, then again, there was buzz he was going to retire. I don't know. Maybe he wants to run it back. Maybe in the building, all that talk is sincere about, we're about winning and one last go around with this gang, and then next offseason, then we'll make some bigger changes. Maybe under that thought, Villanueva wants to be around for it, and Roethlisberger wants him to be a part of the thing, and based on that. But I don't see Connor coming back. I don't know. Maybe Tomlin really does sing his praises. I don't see him as a fit for what Canada likes doing, though. And, listen, as good a story as the city of Pittsburgh has seen from one of its athletes, such a cool story. Unfortunately, it was undone. I hate to be a creep, but, big fumbles in big spots by Connor. That more than anything is, and obviously had some injury issues too that wouldn't go away. But I mean, the more damning thing is I can think of 3 games during his career that he fumbled away that maybe made the Steelers miss the playoffs. I mean, straight up, like if you keep the entire season exactly the same and flip 2 or 3 of those Connor fumbles, I mean, they might've made the playoffs once or twice. So no, I'm assuming that the organization's aware of that. And Jordan Berry, he was back. Actually, I'll say this. He was better when they brought him back last year than he had ever been prior to that. But then again, you see other teams. It's a position that you can really put more pressure on the defense or put on the other team than what the Steelers typically have done. It's sort of been a throwaway since Sepulveda. They took the shot with him however long ago that was. That 10 years ago now
he got hurt too much.
Yeah, but since then it doesn't feel like that they're. But let's have fun. Like let's do some of the stuff that like 21st century thinking teams are doing with one of those Aussie rules guys. Bring that. Let's get us one of them. A guy who directionally punts and all that kind of stuff instead of a guy who just does the pedestrian stuff that Jordan Berry does. But he was bad. I guess if I had to say. Which of those guys would you want back? I would think that the Steelers did some good upgrading at running back and offensive line if Villanueva and Connor aren't back. So I would, reading the tea leaves, I guess if I had to choose right now, I would say bring back Jordan Berry because that means the Steelers replace Villanueva and Connor with what they consider to be upgrades.
All right, so now it's time for the piece de resistance. As you know, it's almost off-season grading time for a lot of sports talk hosts around the city. The Fan, along with Arthur Moats yesterday, had a nice little discussion about what they believe the Steelers did this offseason. Arthur Moats gave them a C-, Chris Muller a D+, and Andrew Filipponi gave the Steelers a nice F. So, Dave, what do you grade the Steelers' free agency period so far?
Incomplete. I'm sorry. I know that's not as much fun as giving them a harsh negative grade or saying an A. I'm not going to give them an A either because we don't know. We've got to see what they do in the draft with offensive line specifically. I'll be surprised if one of those first 2 picks isn't used on somebody for the offensive line. I think everybody gets that that's the case. It's in a vacuum. If you were to look at the last 5 weeks and then plus the Browns playoff game, and by the way, I'm not trying to rewrite history. That was an embarrassment. That was the all-time Steelers embarrassment of my lifetime. Losing at home to the Cleveland Browns in January. I don't know that it could. The Jags loss was embarrassing. The Tebow thing was a shame, but nothing can match up with losing, getting whipped at home by the Browns. That was disgusting. But the thing I keep saying is, in a vacuum, I'd love to have Justin Fields. It would be great if the Steelers could figure out how to get Justin Fields, or if they knew how to get the guy who I thought that realistically, based on the cap and otherwise, who they could get for low money in the short term and then pay more over the ensuing years was Matthew Stafford. But okay, that didn't work out. There is no path, and I don't even know what's going on with Deshaun Watson at this point that makes any sense there. But, Russell Wilson wants to get traded. The Steelers do not possess the assets to get any of the guys I just named. They do not have with the Jets are well positioned to do something because they have the 2nd overall pick. So if they want to trade that to Seattle and some other stuff, it makes sense that the Seahawks would look at that because they could replace their franchise quarterback with the 2nd overall pick and, take Trey Lance or Justin Fields or Zach Wilson or whatever strikes their face. The Steelers have nothing to give. So this idea about how could they hold back the progress of the Steelers, Roethlisberger doesn't hold them back from anything because there is no practical alternative out there for them. What do you want them to do? People keep saying, Muller and Filipponi, when I've spoken with them about it, they say, but don't, Mason Rudolph, give him a turn and let's see what he's got for a full year to evaluate him. And, now Dwayne Haskins is there. And then maybe you see with both of them, The problem with that is you're really going to give 17 games. You're going to burn that off the careers of Minka and TJ Watt and Cam Hayward to see about Mason Rudolph. This isn't some project guy. This isn't like Jordan Love in Green Bay. Like, we think the time is right for this kid. This is a 3rd-round draft pick in Mason Rudolph. We've seen him. He played well in Cleveland. I understand. Is that a reason that you're really going to flush Roethlisberger down the toilet and just devote the 2021 season? And again, that's the option. It is Roethlisberger or Mason Rudolph / I guess Dwayne Haskins if he makes the roster. There's no one in the draft. Do you want the Steelers to use a 1st-round pick on Kyle Trask? That would make me sick if they did that. That would be a bad mistake, and I don't think that's one they would make. I'd love it if they got Trey Lance, like I say, or Justin Fields. There is no path to getting either one of those. Ergo, this is like Gene Hackman, like Coach Dale says, to the Hickory crowd gathered when Jimmy Chitwood isn't out there and they're introducing the team to the town. It's like, this is your team. This is our team, Pittsburgh. There's nothing you can do about it. There is no workaround. There is no better quarterback that the Steelers can go get. Jameis isn't an option. Russell Wilson's not an option. Justin Fields isn't. And Mason Rudolph shouldn't be. Ergo, 7 in 2021. Get on board or get out of the way.
Well, Dave, the Steelers are picking 24th in the draft, and that's where the Packers did get Aaron Rodgers once upon a time. But obviously, as you said that before, quarterback's not happening at 24. So realistically, what are the Steelers' draft needs right now, and who would you focus on with the Steelers' first pick in the draft?
Well, Miami is a team that might go running back in the 1st round, and the Jets might, but there aren't a lot out there. So I think that, they'll obviously be able to monitor how that particular position's going. And it seems like the 3 big names you keep hearing are Najee Harris and ATN and Javonte Williams. It seems like one of those guys should be there in the 2nd round if the Steelers are intent on doing that or rolling the dice and letting it go deeper into the draft. And by the way, as far as that goes, Leonard Fournette is still out there. Nobody has signed him, have they? Unless that's changed in the last couple hours. There are names out there that are, I don't want them to roll, by the way, with Benny Snell. I think that would not. I think people are overestimating what he would do if you tried to hand him the ball 15, 20 times a game. I don't think he's that pedigree. But either way, I would not be outraged as a lot of people would if they took Najee Harris, because I always point to Sony Michel. He's the reason that the Patriots won that Super Bowl. I know Tom Brady was on the team and everything else, and they were essential, but he was the difference maker, was Michel. Look at what he did. Really, the Jesse James game and all of that, it kind of started right around that time that they started to really turn things over to Michel that December and into the postseason. They rode him real good. I point to Peyton in 2015. Now, that wasn't a run-heavy team, but a defense-dominant team. And then I think about Elway with Terrell Davis. There are examples that exist that aren't from 1962 that should give you some cause for optimism if you're Pittsburgh. Yes, the quarterback is the most important position perennially if you want to be a contender in the NFL. Perennially. I don't mean as a one-off. I don't mean Joe Flacco might find lightning in a bottle for 5 weeks, or Nick Foles might do well for 3 weeks. If you want to be a consistent contender, you better have one of the 8 or 10 best QBs in the game. But either way, the Steelers have no path to that right now. If they get a running back, a difference maker at running back, and add maybe even just one more piece to that offensive line, I think they can succeed. So whether they do that in the 1st or 2nd, I think they really need to get a different maker there. Whether it's a Leonard Fournette type, which is Najee Harris type, which is to say more of a banger, or if they want the home run hitter. And then beyond that, again, I guess it comes down to, what do they think of Lane and Pierre? Do they really buy those guys? Because if there's a nice corner there, the thing that the Steelers haven't typically done is reach for need. Colbert's done more of that. People overstate that the Steelers always draft best player available. Not really. The last decade, they have gone out of their way to try and get a position of need. But for the most part, they don't take a position just to say, well, we needed that position, and so we took it. If the high grade left tackles that are out there right now are gone, I don't think Colbert's going to say, yeah, but the people have pounded the table that we need a left tackle, so we're just going to take the best available at that position. I think they'll take something close to the best player available. Still, though, I think left tackle, maybe center, although uninspired in the first round. They have had some success going that route, though. Or maybe a running back. There's not really a tight end with that kind of a grade. There's some buzz for an inside linebacker. There's some good talent that looks like it's going to be there at the back end of the first round at OLB to maybe pair up there. But I feel like Highsmith, I think we've collectively agreed, look good enough that they don't have to go out of their way to try and replace him, but they do need to figure out some depth there going into the season.
For the record, Dave, I just wanted to say this. I think you kind of got your timeline messed up on Michel, because you mentioned it like he was a part of the 2018 Super Bowl in which the Patriots lost to the Eagles. He was on the Patriots team the next year against the Rams. He was still in Georgia.
2018 is when Mahomes, and then 2019. No, I have that right, don't I? Yeah, because they beat you could be right. No, I think I'm right. 2018 is the year that they win in Arrowhead. D Ford lines up offside.
Wasn't he in? No, actually 2018, he was drafted in the 2018 draft. So it was the year before you were mentioning. You got it mixed up a bit.
Oh, with the Jesse James.
Oh, Jesse James. I screwed that one up. Yes. The Steelers. What'd they do against?
Actually, that was the Super Bowl in which
the Steelers beat them that year. Actually, that's when you're right. That's when
Zach Ertz was the one. Zach Ertz actually benefited from Jesse James not catching the ball, because you remember in that Super Bowl, he caught it, but it kind of looked like he dropped it a little bit, but they rolled it a touchdown, and then we found out after the fact that the Jesse James rule affected that touchdown call. It was on the way towards them winning that Super Bowl.
I'm out of here. You don't bring me on this show and then call me out for being wrong. I'm not going to sit here and take that. No, that was the game. And that was the one when Jalen Samuels had the big game improbably against that was a bizarre one that he did. And then Joe Hayden picked off Brady towards the end of that game. That's right. Either way, point stands. They rode Michel real good, including in Arrowhead. I think he had 2 or 3 touchdowns on that game.
Would you like me to edit that around?
No, just leave it. That's fine. Have your little victory. You hear that, Dave? Dave, they bring on that bomb Dameshek, and then he says dumb stuff about Sony Michel, and Dave, he's like talking about Tom Brady, like Tom Brady isn't the best player on that team, and he's talking like Sony Michel is. So he got owned, dude. He got owned. He deserved it. You know.
We only have one more question after this one, but I just wanted to know, Dave, what are your thoughts on all the Steelers going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in August with the 2020 and 2021 classes getting inducted? You know, Bill Cowher, Donnie Shell, Floyd Polamalu, Alan Faneca, and Bill Nunn. It should be a great summer in Canton, or great in August with all those guys getting inducted. It should be filled with black and gold there in Canton.
Oh man, it's just the greatest. If you've ever been to Canton for an induction when a Steeler, it really fills you with pride, and it's also great because more so than any other franchise, proximity allows Steelers fans to go there. Now, of course, Cleveland's even closer. The problem for Browns fans is that the team that they root for is the Browns. And so how many of those people would ever go into the Hall of Fame? And it makes you extra proud of that, because you realize, like, these poor people, just less than an hour north of here, the cathedral for pro football, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, just an hour north or maybe even less. There's Cleveland, and 2 hours away, there's Pittsburgh. And these people, they could have rooted for the Steelers, but instead they decided to go with Cleveland. And now they have to deal with that for the rest of their lives. So close yet so far, separated by that state border. I feel bad for those people, but you know what? I don't bother too much with them, and instead focus in on how good it is to be on the right side of history, rooting for the Steelers and this will be a good chance to do it. Now we got to get the late great L.C. Greenwood in there. That's my reaction. Is we still haven't gotten enough guys in. L.C. Greenwood is the biggest outstanding swing and miss, and just because he was on a team that has so many other guys, that's a ridiculous standard. Though I can't have all the Steelers in there. All right, don't have to have them all in. We don't have to, we don't have to put Ouija Thompson in there, but we do have to put L.C. Greenwood in there.
And do you plan on going to Canton this summer to see the Hall of Fame?
I don't know. I probably won't end up getting out there because my trips to Pittsburgh to check out Steelers related things are limited at this point with all the kids and all the stuff out here. But I don't know. I have not poured over yet when I'm going to be making my autumn runs out to Pittsburgh, and we'll see. Maybe I'll do it. What is that, first week of August or somewhere around there where they do the induction. It's cool. If you haven't been there, it's worth checking out because it'll definitely be a lot. There will definitely be tons of terrible towels and all that out there.
And then lastly, I know following your Twitter account, it's great. I love seeing all the Steelers history stuff that you tweet out. So I was just interested, do you have a favorite Steeler of all time, or is it, it's too tough to pick, just one guy or one player?
Well, my guy is Ike Taylor. I've gotten to know him over the last 10 years or so, and we work together a fair amount and everything. And, he's as nice and fun a guy as you could meet. But growing up, I was a huge, split loyalties between 88. I remember I was at Three River Stadium when I was a little kid for the divisional and championship games in 78 and 79. And remember Lynn Swann coming out there when they would do the Steeler polka, and I can't remember the guy's name, Jimmy. What was his name? Who would stand on the back of a bed of a pickup truck and sing the Steeler polka. We're from the town with the Super Bowl team.
Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And then Lynn Swann would run onto the field. I mean, this is what I try to point out to people when they say Juju is too busy with the antics and the dancing and everything. Well, I remember Lynn Swann. These are playoff games that were being played. He would run out with two terrible towels in his hands, spinning those for the crowd. And by the way, just if you see my Twitter feed, I keep tweeting it out there. Terry Bradshaw, after 2 Super Bowls and before 2 more, is making country albums and doing movies with Mel Tillis and Burt Reynolds, and Frenchie Fuqua's putting goldfish in his heels, and Mean Joe Green made the Coke commercial. And, listen, these guys, Fats Holmes shot at a police helicopter and everything. The difference is media attention and the ability, social media has heightened these things, but it's not like if you're under the impression that I miss the Steelers of old in the 70s when they were just 100% about pigskin and they didn't bother with anything else. Like, no, they took as much advantage as that era allowed them to take advantage of in terms of making money and making themselves into individual personalities beyond just guys who were wearing the helmets. This is what the 21st century Steelers and other professional athletes have now extended that into. It's the options. And I mean, from Nike and Air Jordan on, that really changed things, and the ability to control your own brand. I mean, don't be mad at Juju. As they say, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Dave, was it Jimmy Pohl?
That sounds right. Yeah, it was something like that. Big sunglasses that consumed half his face, and a 70s hairdo, and a big guy. But like Franco, take that football all the way up the field. Oh, we'd sing along. It was the greatest.
Well, Dave, I know you got to run, but we want to know where to find some of your stuff out there, because a lot of your podcasts are great, and you told us a little bit beforehand that you had an interesting podcast with Mike Tannenbaum. We want to know more about that.
Yeah, it's the most recent episode of -3. Well, I guess depending when you're listening to this, but yeah, track it down. We did a good free agency deep dive. We've been talking with a lot of, for obvious reasons, I guess basically the stuff we've just been talking about here for the last hour. We've had Mark Caboli on from The Athletic and Josh Yohe on to talk some Penguins and everything. So if you're a Pittsburgh sports fan, or really a sports fan of Northeastern sports, that's where our focus is. We keep things on the the East Division in the NHL, and all things Pennsylvania and New York, New Jersey, Boston, that whole region of the country. We don't bother ourselves with what's going on in the rest of the world. But Tannenbaum and Greg Rosenthal from around the NFL joined us to do a good breakdown of those teams specifically. And I think Steelers fans and Eagles fans, Giants, Jets, Patriots fans will enjoy that stuff.
What's the name of the podcast?
That's -3. Track it down, why don't you? And then Extra Points with Cousin Sal, who you may know from the Kimmel Show and from FS1 and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. And that's Dave Dameshek. Thank you so much for coming on the Renegade Blitz.
Thank you, fellas.
And that's all for us now. For Chris Ward, I'm Ty Polk. Thank you for tuning in to the Renegade Blitz. Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. Our podcast is available on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeart, and Spotify.